Welcome back to Upfront, everyone. I'm Matt Smith in for Adrian Pedersen this weekend. Wisconsin State Senator Scott Fitzgerald of Juneau became Wisconsin's newest member of Congress Tuesday, winning the 5th Congressional District, replacing retiring GOP Congressman Jim Sensenbrenner. We're talking now with the Congressman-elect Scott Fitzgerald. Congressman, thanks for your time. The Trump campaign has said it wants to request a recount here in Wisconsin. Will they and should they?
Well, the first step, I think, as some people are aware of, not everybody, but certainly it would be a canvass of the state. And I think that I've heard that a couple of counties have already begun that process, and there will be others that may wait even until Monday to start that. So the canvass is an important part of the process here in Wisconsin. And once that's complete, I think then you'll see kind of where we're headed as far as recount goes.
Let me ask you about some of the claims to that the president has made in recent days. He's talked about illegal votes, voter fraud, secret ballots, stealing the election. He's been saying this without providing evidence. Do you echo that sentiment from him?
Well, see, that's why the canvass is important, because we've never experienced an election like we just went through. I am still blown away by the number of mail-in ballots and in-person ballots that were completed prior to November 3rd. We are in uncharted territory when it comes to an elections. I don't care which side of the aisle you're on. And as a result of that, those are the types of things that could be exposed during the canvass. And then you're into, if you get into recount territory, which it looks like we are, that's a very back and forth type of process in which arguments are made as to whether or not to keep a ballot or throw a ballot out. And I've seen elections change as a result of those recounts. So I know there's others that say that, well, that's still a high margin to really change. But, it can happen. And it's as a result of the many, many thousands of mail-in ballots that we have never seen in this state before.
You think this could change by 20,000 votes?
Well, that's what the canvass will tell us next week. If the canvass comes back and it says, listen, every clerk in the state, no matter at what level they operated, got it right on election night, that makes it much more difficult, I think, to say a recount is in order. But certainly it's within the Trump campaign to request that if they're within the margins. But again, we've never seen an election like this ever in the history of the state of Wisconsin.
Have you heard of any evidence, or do you have any evidence of any fraud here in the state of Wisconsin?
Well, all I do is go back to what we saw in the spring election, in which a lot of those mail-in ballots simply did not include a signature of any witness. I mean, that was a simple example of ballots that needed to be reconsidered as a result of that. So we're not talking about anything that, maybe even intentional. But, whether it means that there was no photo ID included, or, like I said, a witness on an envelope, those are the types of things that are debated and discussed during a recount.
You'll be forced to deal with coronavirus in Congress. There's talks of more stimulus potentially. The White House task force just this week saying there's an unrelenting rise in cases and test positivity in Wisconsin, saying a more comprehensive mitigation strategy is needed. Is that pointing the finger at Republicans in the legislature?
Yeah, I mean, this has been going on for some time, obviously, but when the first CARES package was passed by Congress, the Wisconsin State Legislature came in and put together an omnibus bill, and we passed that very quickly. We have been waiting for Congress to do something else since then. I heard talk this morning already about Senator Mitch McConnell and Speaker Pelosi going back to the negotiating table. If something is passed out in D.C. and it requires the Wisconsin legislature to again act, then, that would be something for us to consider.
Do you have any regrets about how Republicans have handled the response statewide so far?
No one knew we were going to be in the middle of a worldwide pandemic. There's enough blame to go around if there's any type of negative. I'm really concerned about the way that Governor Evers is handling the corona outbreak within the prison system right now. That's something that he and his Secretary of Corrections controls directly. And unfortunately, they don't seem to have a handle on it. If there's any really kind of acute thing going on in the state right now, It's the outbreak within the prisons, and it needs to be dealt with very quickly.
Going back to the election and the canvass that is ongoing here in the state, I mean, are you confident once that is complete that we have free and fair elections, not only in the state but across the country?
I hope so, because if we're headed towards all of these ballots, just thousands and thousands of ballots cast that we just didn't anticipate as a legislature before this election, if we're going to continue in that direction, I think that there are many safeguards that need to be put in place that just aren't there in this election cycle. And, you know, that can be done. I mean, it is something that the legislature can work on state by state by state and make sure that those protections are in place.
But you believe, though, do you believe those were legally cast this election cycle?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, most of the clerks did a good job of trying to manage an unmanageable situation at some point. And this goes way back to even our spring elections when we saw some of this. So, yeah, I would say that state legislatures are up to that and probably can tackle those types of issues. But, you know, it does raise some concerns as to if suddenly we're headed in this direction, there have to be more safeguards put in place.
Senate Majority Leader, Congressman-elect in the 5th Congressional District, Scott Fitzgerald, it's good to see you. We appreciate your time and get some rest this weekend.
Thank you very much. It was great to be with you.
Thank you. Depending on what happens in Georgia, Republicans will likely retain control of the U.S. Senate, and some changes will be coming. Senators are term limited on committee chairmanships. Politico is reporting that Wisconsin Republican Senator Ron Johnson will give up the chairmanship of the Homeland Security Committee. Johnson has used it to investigate the Biden family. Politico says Ohio Senator Rob Portman will take over that chairmanship. Next on Upfront, another epic failure. How did the polling industry get this election so wrong?